The two most common questions I get are how to turn back the increasingly corrupt system and how to financially prepare for a post-dollar world. This does not surprise me since fear and greed are the two most powerful motivators known to man. What will surprise you is that for once, the answer for both questions is the same. Buying physical silver is the greatest act of wisdom and rebellion that any American could and should be doing right now. It is both a silver bullet to rebel against the elite's corrupt system and a silver shield to protect your family and wealth in a post-dollar world. Buying physical silver is a non-violent, non-compliant resistance. Most importantly, it works outside the system and it cannot be stopped. As long as you play by the elite's rules, the elite will rule. Any effort to work within the elite's paradigm will fail. The Tea Party March on Washington failed. It failed like the 2010 Tea Party congressional campaign. It failed like the Occupy Wall Street movement has. It failed because nothing happened and nothing changed. That is not to say that these were not great exercises in power. It just never will bring about any real change, because awareness campaigns and marches are not enough. Let them march all they want so long as they pay their taxes. Alexander Haig. The elite that own and control our paradigm do not care what we say or do, so long as we do not threaten the root of their power. We have to hack at the root. This silver bullet and silver shield plan will fundamentally change the game and do it from outside the system. It will overthrow the elitist system that enslaves us with debt and do so without a shot being fired. Most importantly, there is no way the elite can stop it. The plan is quite simple. Sell every single asset you own right now and buy physical silver. As with anything in life, knowing the answer is not as important as knowing the why. The why is what brings about fundamental change in your thinking. This change in thinking brings absolute certainty to the outcome. Absolute certainty brings about massive action. Banking was conceived in inequity and was born in sin. The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with a flick of the pen, they will create enough deposits to buy it back again. However, take it away from them, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear, as they ought to disappear. For this would be a happier and better world to live in. But if you wish to remain slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create money. Sir Josiah Stamp, Director of the Bank of England, appointed in 1928, and reputed to be the second wealthiest man in England at the time. Silver is the Achilles heel of the elite's paradigm. By transferring their fake corrupt paper money into real honest money like silver, it will ultimately destroy the control of their money debt system. The more money debt they create, the more it will work against them as we put more of that money into silver. Every single evil in this world is made possible only through the elite's debt money system. Through the control of the privately and foreign-owned central banks, the elite control our money, our food, our industries, our government, our media, our natural resources, our capital markets, our military, and ultimately you. This iron fist control enables wars, propaganda, police states, corruptions, pollution, crime, drug trade, disintegration of families, etc. In fact, if you show me an evil that you fight against, I will show you how it all comes back to the very corrupt basis of our money. I intend to show how silver is an antiseptic for all these ills. Buying physical silver acts both as a silver bullet to all the evils in the world and a silver shield for all that you love in this world. Buying physical silver will bring about more political change than all the political campaigns will ever do. It will reverse the tide of wealth going to the elite and even Asia. It will stop tyranny and free billions from the bondage of debt slavery. It will bring about a new era of human progress unlike anything you can imagine right now. If we simply take away the elite's power, how fast and far could we progress as a race if we did not waste our efforts on debt, wars, and taxes? The silver bullet and the silver shield can and will bring about this change. Now that I've raised the bar to the moon, let's get this show going. Buying physical silver can be the second American Revolution without firing a single shot. In order for a revolutionary idea to take hold, you must feel it in your soul. It is important to know that not everyone has the same motivations. I will attempt to lay out as many rationales as I can to help you commit to this plan and encourage others to do the same. I will use both positive and negative motivations on why you should be buying physical silver. I will appeal to your rational and irrational desires. I will give you the financial, historical, political, geological, mathematical, legal, intellectual, emotional, and even spiritual reasons why you should be buying physical silver. To buy or not to buy physical silver is the greatest decision you have to make before the worldwide collapse of the debt-based fiat currencies. If you fully commit to this idea, you will be taking charge of your future, and I believe you will be creating generational wealth. If you do not commit to this plan, I bet your grandchildren will curse you for not taking advantage of this opportunity of a lifetime. Throughout history, silver has been used as money in more times and more places than gold. To function as money, a monetary item should possess a number of features. It needs to be a medium of exchange. It should have the liquidity and be easily tradable. It should be easily transportable. Precious metals have a high value-to-weight ratio, and it should be durable. To be a unit of account, it should be divisible into small units without destroying its value. Precious metals can be coined from bars or melted down into bars again with a low percentage cost. It should be fungible, that is, one unit or one piece is equivalent to another unit, which is why diamonds and works of art and real estate are not suitable as money. It must have a specific weight or measure or size to be certifiably accountable. The third feature is that it needs to be a store of value. It should be long-lasting, durable, and it must not be perishable or subject to decay. It should have a stable value. It should be difficult to counterfeit, and the genuine must be easily recognizable. Today's silver is not used as money since it does not circulate, but it still provides a crucial role as a store of value. Why do silver and gold have value?
Why is gold worth some $20 an ounce?
I don't know, because it's scarce.
1,000 men say go searching for gold. After 6 months, one of them's lucky. 1 out of the 1,000. His find represents not only his own labor, but that of 999 others to boot. That's 6,000 months or 500 years, scrabbling over mountains, going hungry and thirsty. An ounce of gold, mister, is worth what it is because of the human labor that went into the finding and the getting of it.
Now think about how much energy, labor, ingenuity, and time that goes into finding that silver and refining it.
The mining company produces silver bars, the composition of which is 93 to 97% pure silver. It sells the bars to a refinery, which further purifies them for sale to industries. The action begins down in the mine, where geologists point a night-on gun at various spots in the rock face. The device detects the levels of 40 different elements, including silver. Silver in its natural state isn't silver-colored at all. It's charcoal gray. Those silver-looking deposits are actually zinc and lead. Miners drill holes in the silver-rich areas the geologists pinpointed, then insert sticks of dynamite. After the blast, carts haul the chunks of rock, called ore, to the surface. Geologists then test ore piles and blend them as required to achieve a consistent amount of silver content per kilogram of ore. The ore first goes into the primary crusher. The machine's huge steel teeth break up the big chunks into smaller pieces. Those pieces then drop through grates below into the secondary crusher, which breaks them down into even smaller pieces. Those go into vibrating cone crushers, which pulverize them into tiny pieces. A conveyor transports the crushed ore to the ball mill. At this point, the ore pieces are roughly 6 millimeters big. As the mill's large cylinder rotates, steel balls bounce around inside, grinding the ore into powder. A water circulation system flushes the silver-rich powder out of the cylinder and into large tanks which keep the water moving. To separate and dissolve the metals the powder contains, workers pour in acid. 72 hours later, the rock waste now settled at the bottom, the solution containing dissolved silver is pumped through filter presses. The filter plates are treated with a zinc-based chemical which attracts silver molecules. As the solution passes through, the plates trap particles containing silver, forming a layer of black powder called silver precipitate. This precipitate is composed of approximately 50% silver and 50% waste, the waste being a jumble of various metals, dirt, and other impurities. To separate the silver from the waste, they first dry the precipitate in a gas furnace for a couple of hours. In the mining company's lab, technicians continuously test ore samples to determine the grade, the term for the quantity of silver per kilogram of ore. They heat the samples to 1093 degrees Celsius for about an hour to burn off the impurities. What's left after the burn-off are the silver and other metals, such as lead, zinc, copper, selenium, and cadmium. Lab technicians then treat the samples with a chemical that prevents silver from burning off and put them back in the oven. When the samples come out about an hour later, all the other metals have burnt off and only silver is left. They weigh the silver and compare it to the weight of the original sample in order to calculate the grade. The key to running a profitable mine is to ensure that the grade is consistently within certain parameters. Back at the mill, workers put the now dried silver precipitate into an oven, along with chemicals which prevent silver from burning off. Approximately 4 hours later, the silver and waste have separated and melted. Workers pour them into bar-shaped molds. The silver, being heavier, settles at the bottom. Workers skim off the waste floating on top. In less than 5 minutes, the molten silver cools and hardens, enabling workers to extract what is now a silver bar. The mining company sells the bars to a refinery for processing into industrial-grade silver.
It's crazy to think that all those tons of earth were moved just to find 1 ounce of silver, and right now we can buy it all for less than a dinner for 4 at our local sports bar. Why should I choose silver and not gold? 95% of the gold that's ever been mined is still in existence in some form or another because it has been treasured. And yet 95%, if not more, of the silver that has ever been mined has been destroyed or used in such small quantities, for all practical purposes, it's gone forever. The elite and their central banks own tons of gold and no silver. Silver is cheaper than gold. The average American can buy 1 ounce of silver without much thought. But if he wants to even buy 1 ounce of gold, he would probably have to talk to his spouse about it. This means that when the chickens come home to roost, people will be able to afford silver on the way up than they will be able to afford gold. Gold has very few uses compared to silver. Gold mines are common, but silver is mined mainly as a byproduct of other minerals and metals like zinc. The Gold Antitrust Action Committee has led the charge for years in exposing bankers' manipulation of gold. Their investigations and awareness campaigns have led to a heightened awareness of gold in the investment community. GATA is headed by Chris Powell and Bill Murphy. This group spent $265,000 to get a full-page article in the Wall Street Journal asking, "Where is our gold?" This brave action asked the investment community why our gold reserves have not been audited in 50 years and how much gold we really have. I judge men not by the answers they give, but by the questions they ask. This question was a direct assault in the heart of the beast. GATA found out that awareness campaigns are nice, but they do not change the game. And I remember a year or so after that, GATA actually came out and supported the idea to actually sell gold and buy silver, because the battle against the bankers is easier to win in the silver market. No central banks have silver to sell like they do gold. The market for silver is so small compared to gold that very little money would be needed to have the bankers capitulate in their duplicitous acts. When the Gold Antitrust Action Committee says to sell gold and buy silver, you have to pay attention. Silver has been used as an industrial metal for the past 100 years and has not been cherished for what it really is, a precious metal. Industrial metals like aluminum, copper, and iron are plentiful and can be used in huge quantities and disposed of or recycled. Unlike most industrial metals, silver is used in such small quantities in proportion to the finished product that it's not recycled except in photography.
My socks have nano silver on them too, and they kill the bacteria that ew.
Silver literally has been thrown away into toxic trash piles all over the world and thus has disappeared. In fact, here's a chart showing for the past 64 years the world has consumed more silver than it's produced. Silver is an indispensable metal. Next to oil, silver is the most widely used commodity ever, and it has more than 10,000 uses. As technology progresses and expands, silver's usefulness will explode even further. Its unique characteristics are unlike any other commodity in the world. It is the most reflective of all metals. It is the greatest conductor of both heat and electricity. It strongly resists corrosion. It is the second most malleable and ductile metal next to gold. It has recently been discovered to be a very effective antimicrobial and bacterial metal. It's used in batteries, bearings, brazing, soldering, catalysts, clothes, coins, electrical components, electronics, electroplating, photography, medical applications, jewelry, silverware, mirrors, coatings, solar energy, and water purification. Silver is generally used in such small quantities, and its unique characteristics make it irreplaceable. This is what makes its price inelastic. All commodities have a self-correcting price mechanism except for silver. If a commodity's price rises too high, demand drops off as people seek substitutes or supply rises to meet the demand, thus lowering the price. This mechanism does not exist for silver. Silver is typically used in very small quantities and high-tech components, and there is no substitute for it, so a manufacturer or customer will have to absorb any price increase. Silver is now starting to be used in clothing to reduce odors caused by bacteria. What is remarkable about it is that by weight, silver represents only 1/40,000th of the total of inputs on that shirt. When used in such tiny quantities, silver's price is almost irrelevant. Over 20 million tons of polyester sportswear produced every year. The textile industry consumes 1,200 tons of silver annually. That's 38 million ounces. Let's say, for example, the average computer contains 1/10 of an ounce of silver. That would mean that there is about $3 of silver in the computer. Now let's assume the computer in question costs $1,500. If silver were to go to $1,000 an ounce, the same silver in that computer would be $100. Do you think Apple Computer is going to throw its arms up in the air and cry that they can no longer sell computers because silver is too expensive? No, they will raise the price of the computer and probably advertise that it has the most silver in it. Do you think the average consumer is going to say, I would buy a computer at $1,500, but at $1,600, no way? No, they'll find a way to get the extra $100 so they can read the latest online news about Miley Cyrus. It's not just consumer products that are at risk. It's the companies, the industries, the nations that are at risk. Apple has a market cap of $400 billion. If a strategic commodity like silver starts having shortages, their billion-dollar empire is endangered. Companies will go into panic buying, securing any amount of physical silver they can because their entire value-added business is dependent upon it. They will not be buying SLV or certificates of deposits. Only the real physical silver will suffice. They will whip out their huge checkbook and stock up. Now you can see why rising prices actually increase demand. And it's not just the computer industry that's relying upon silver. It's the multi-billion-dollar industries like energy, medical, and the military. And soon the banking industry, as their debt money system collapse. This directly affects national destinies. Governments held approximately 10 billion ounces of silver in 1950 and have been supplying that physical stock steadily into the open market for years. Today there is no more surplus left to sell. The nations that manage their resources the best will win the future. Unlike industrial demand, monetary demand has no limits. The monetary demand will eventually send silver to the moon. How will quadrillions of fiat paper money flow into less than 1 billion ounces of silver? It's impossible. Paper is poverty. It is the ghost of money and not money itself. Thomas Jefferson. I have seen bright and intelligent men fail to understand that the electronic digits in their computer screens are not real money. They always do get it when you hold an ounce of gold or a 100-ounce bar of silver. It's a frightening aspect of our society that we've become so detached from real money that most of us cannot even comprehend real money. Do yourself a favor this week and go to your local coin shop and just touch an ounce of gold or a big fat shiny bar of silver. Then look at that wad of paper in your wallet, or worse, the digits in your bank account, and tell me honestly, where would you rather invest your future? Infinite money in a finite world. The irresistible force paradox asks, what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object? Our debt-based monetary system must create more debt each and every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before. The more debt money the bankers create, the more profit they have. The more money debt the politicians spend, the more power they have. This sick symbiotic relationship of lender of last resort meets the spender of last resort ensures exponential growth of money. The elite will keep using the power of the printing press to maintain their power, but ultimately this will only accelerate their demise. There is a mathematical inevitable end to this system, as infinite money debt meets the world's finite resources and ultimately the limits of human faith. The more money and debt chasing after fewer goods and services will cause inflation. Ultimately, people's faith in currency will fail worldwide. It will become evident that the elite intend to print the currency into oblivion, ruining the main function of money as a store of value. When this happens, people will throw their depreciating currency at any tangible asset they can get their hands on. Precious metals will be the main beneficiary of this. The frightening thing is that it's not just American citizens that will be affected by this global destruction of paper currency, because this will be the first time in human history in which the entire world has become interconnected and dependent upon this fiat monetary illusion. Stop thinking about another American Great Depression and start thinking about the Dark Ages. My suggestion would be to beat the rush and panic now. People are concerned with overpopulation, unfunded liabilities, global warming, and peak oil. For the most part, these are scary campfire stories the elite pawn on us to scare the masses into larger global governance. One key flaw to all these theories is that they rely upon our current monetary order remaining in place. Since the time of the Tower of Babel, man has built systems that work against the natural laws of our world. This has accomplished great feats, but like most man-made systems, they're built on the idea of pushing to the extremes and not focusing on balance. Inevitably, all things that go up must come down, and our monetary system is no different. With the collapse of the monetary order, all these theories and problems will cease to be issues, because they will be self-corrected by the end of the one thing that makes them possible: exponential growth of money and debt. When this current monetary order dies, so will millions, if not billions of people, as an era of unlimited money comes to an end. Think of the millions that are on food stamps that have no support system to carry them. Think about the billions of dollars in food subsidies ending, food riots, skyrocketing food and fuel prices globally. In this hyperinflationary collapse of the world's money, I predict that up to 90% of your money will go towards food and fuel. Not your mortgage, not your car payments, taxes, tuitions, medical bills, or anything else. Just the basic necessities like food and fuel. Most will not be able to make this transition and unfortunately will die. And that is before the wars, riots, and violence take even more people down. This dramatic shift in life will also prevent people from having children in this turbulence. There will be a scar in the human experience that will be felt for generations. This hyperinflationary depression will stop global manufacturing in its tracks. So if you're one of those misguided people that believe in man-made global warming, the collapse of the dollar will do more to stop human activity than 10 Kyoto protocols or carbon Ponzi schemes. Peak oil theorists, you can stop worrying too. When the dollar collapses, the energy-intensive Western lifestyle will be cut by 75%. No longer will the economy be able to support gas guzzlers, the largest military power ever known, or wasteful corporate giants. The value of oil will skyrocket, and the demand will drop significantly, leading to a much longer availability of our current reserves. My greatest hope is that the elite will lose their power to manipulate the all-important oil market. I have no proof, but I've been studying these criminals for 7 years, and I believe that they have suppressed technologies that would have rendered oil less important, and I also believe that we have domestic sources here at home that have not been tapped as they set out to strategically use the rest of the world's oil first. My prediction is after a new monetary order is established, the elite will announce amazing new discoveries here at home that will shock the world. This will also push King Herbert's bell curve out further. Things that cannot go on forever won't. When the mathematically inevitable collapse of the world's fiat currency occurs, all of those problems and theories will no longer matter. There will be a massive inflation in real assets, with precious metals, food, and fuel far outpacing all other assets. This will lead to the final exhaustion as old powers try to hold on to power. This will bring about regional wars, civil wars, revolutions, famine, and disease. These events will cut populations, economies, debts, and energy use, and will throw our lives back into a much more local, slower reality. Silver has another awesome quality. It has a alloidial title to it. If you hold it, you own it. Almost every asset you own is controlled by somebody else. If you own your house outright, you still have to pay property tax, which means you really don't own it. Your cars, computers, TVs, and clothes are rendered less valuable with each registration, taxation, new fashion, or planned obsolescence. Even your stocks are not really yours because the actual certificates are being held by the nefarious DTCC. Who knows if they're selling stock that maybe they don't have? Have you ever heard of naked short selling? Silver is without counterparty risk. You do not have to rely upon somebody else fulfilling a promise for your asset to have value. All paper assets have counterparty risk. They use interest rates to value the risk that you might not get your money back. This will become very important as our society collapses and promises are broken by all. When the collapse accelerates, people will do the unspeakable thing as they become more and more desperate. People whom you have relied upon for years will suddenly break faith. This will not only happen on an individual level, but also on a corporate and governmental level. Pensions will be cut, benefits terminated, interest payments not paid. And this is where things get really scary. At this point, we'll either see a deflationary crash or hyperinflationary depression. It will be a deflationary crash if there's not enough money to pay the increasing debt and interest. but I believe the elite will pay all the obligations to keep their game going.
Do you still believe that we should maintain the fundamental principles of Social Security as you did in 83?
I think we should maintain the principles of Social Security, but I think the existing structure is not working, and that until we can construct a system which creates the savings that are required to build the real assets so that the retirees have real goods and services, we don't have a system that's working. We have one that basically moves cash around, and we can guarantee cash benefits as far out and at whatever size you like, but we cannot guarantee their purchasing power. And this is why the issue ultimately has got to be resolved in terms of, do we have the material goods and services that people will need to consume, not whether or not we pass some hurdle with respect to how legal financing occurs, because the financing is a secondary issue, and it's the means to create the real wealth, not an end in itself.
This will get every promise paid with toilet paper currency. During the height of the Roman Empire, the average day's pay for the average soldier or worker was the silver denarius. The denarius was 1/10 of an ounce of silver and very similar to our silver dimes of yesteryear. What I find amazing is the implied value of this coin into our modern lives. This dime of the Roman Empire was the average day's pay for the average worker. It paid for all the living expenses of a man and his family, food, shelter, clothes, taxes, and maybe a little fun from time to time. How would we begin to relate the value of that silver dime to where we are today? First, think about the kind of work a Roman soldier or a field worker would have to go through to get that denarius. Most likely, that Roman soldier would be enduring terrible conditions or fighting hand-to-hand combat. The average worker would be working 12 hours a day using rudimentary tools, doing arduous tasks to eke out an existence. The average American soldier or laborer probably makes the minimum wage of about $8 an hour. If we multiplied $8 times 12 hours the Roman laborers and soldiers would have had to work, that would make the implied value of that silver denarius about $96. If a denarius is 1/10 of an ounce of silver, then the implied value of an ounce of silver is $960. Let's think about this in another way. Judas sold out Jesus Christ for 30 shekels. Each shekel has a half ounce of silver in it. So those 30 shekels was about 15 ounces of silver. Would you condemn anyone, a stranger, a friend, much less the Messiah, to death for $495? Well, if we value silver by what we value it today, that's what it would work out to. But if we valued silver with this implied price of $960 an ounce, that same 15 ounces would be worth $14,400. It's a very big difference, and one that seems to be very similar to those murder-for-hire plots that you hear about on TV. I recently sat down and watched a movie that I had not watched in a long time called Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. If you have not seen this movie, I highly recommend that you watch it. The movie starts off with tenant farmers that are slaving away on their landlord's property. They are protesting the raise in rents on their lands. Tom Cruise's dad is killed, and Tom swears revenge upon the landlord. His father's dying wish is that for his son to work his own land one day and be free. Without getting into the whole story about the huge wealth disparity, or lack of freedom, justice, or middle class, Tom and Nicole end up rushing off to America to get free land that America is giving away. The first thing I found interesting was that Nicole's privileged character transferred her wealth from Ireland to the United States in silver spoons. It provided for a lot of value in a very small space. When they arrived in America, they were met with all sorts of problems, including the theft of the silver and a murder. They were plunged into the bowels of society and ended up living in a whorehouse. They finally landed jobs in a chicken factory. There they worked 12 hours a day using steam hoses to take off the feathers of all the chickens. One night, Tom Cruise's character got all fired up and went to the local bar to do prize fighting. He came home drunk, beat up, with $4 in his boot. Then came the one comment that hit me like a rock. Nicole's character said that $4 was more money than she would make in a month at the chicken factory. Factory workers at the turn of the century earned about 10 cents a day, back when the dime was 1/10 of an ounce of silver. This dime for 12 hours of hard human labor is the same dime that Roman soldiers used back when the denarius was 1/10 of an ounce of silver. The $4 that Tom Cruise's character won prize fighting was more money than she would earn in 40 days of continuous hard human labor in that chicken factory. It doesn't stop there. We've all heard that 2/3 of the world today lives off of less than $2 a day. That would be the equivalent of less than 1/10 of an ounce of silver. With the mathematically inevitable collapse of the dollar, the fiat Ponzi scheme, all paper assets, humans will be forced to revalue everything that they do and desire. The idea that 1/10 of an ounce of silver represented 12 hours of hard human labor during the Roman times, factory workers at the turn of the century, and even 2/3 of the world today is very consistent. The average baby boomer has about $88,000 in retirement. While we all know that $88,000 is not enough to retire in this paper Ponzi scheme, and that you need over $1 million to be able to live comfortably, or at least replace the income that you would be giving up. But with interest rates so low, even that is not enough. For $33,000, one could easily purchase 1,000 ounces of physical silver. If you value that silver not in terms of dollars, how many days of hard human labor that represents, you can start seeing a different way of life. Each ounce of silver represents 10 days of hard human labor throughout all of history and even 2/3 of the world today. 1,000 ounces would represent 10,000 days of consecutive hard human labor, or over 30 years of work. Think about the historical significance of the average person being able to afford 1,000 ounces of silver. I had studied kings of England who did not have 1,000 ounces of silver in their coffers. In fact, for over 800 years, England had to use a tally stick system to act as currency in their country. During the fall of the Roman Empire, barbarians were at the gates of Rome and said that if Rome could pay 1 ton of silver, that the barbarians would go away. The Roman Empire could not or would not come up with a ton of silver to pay off the barbarians, and they were sacked. Today, that same ton of silver would cost just over $1 million. In the United States alone, there are over 11 million millionaires in the United States. Quite feasibly, one of these millionaires could liquidate their paper assets, retirement funds, stocks, bonds, and real estate, and easily afford 1 ton of silver, that which the Roman Empire could not or would not provide during its time of need. For about the cost of a new car, the average person can go out and buy 1,000 ounces of silver. The historical significance of that purchase is truly amazing. Even if you can't afford to buy 1,000 ounces of silver, think of all the silver that you buy in terms of days' labor. Can you buy 100 ounces of silver? That would represent 1,000 days of hard human labor throughout all of history and 2/3 of the world today. Even if you can only afford to buy 10 ounces of silver, that's 100 days of hard human labor when this paper paradigm collapses. Think about the buffer that could provide you and your family. The best estimates of the amount of silver that I see available are that there are 1 billion ounces of physical silver available. There are 7 billion people in the world. If all that silver was evenly divided amongst all humanity, that would represent about 1/10 of an ounce of silver. But we all know that silver is not dispersed evenly. Silver is being accumulated into stronger and stronger hands, who will not sell this physical silver so long as this paper paradigm exists. For about $2.50, you can go out and buy a mercury dime. Each dime you buy represents 1 day's buffer of food, shelter, and clothing for you and your family. The choice to me is simple. Forgo 1 coffee or beer while times are good and buy a mercury dime, or work for 12 hours of hard human labor during desperate times. Right now, gold is nearly double its 1980 nominal high of $850. Silver, on the other hand, is still 30% below its 1980 nominal high of close to $50. Can anybody name me anything that is cheaper now than it was in 1980? We all know that $50 in 2012 does not buy you anywhere near what it did in 1980. If we factor that record 1980 price of $50 in silver using the government's rigged inflation numbers, that means we would have a real inflation-adjusted high of silver at $130. That would mean that we're still 75% below the real inflation-adjusted high of silver back in 1980. If we use that same inflation calculator for gold, we would see the real high for gold is $2,300. This means that we're still 25% below that record in real terms. I believe the real high of silver and gold is much, much higher than that for many reasons. First, the government is lying to you about the real rate of inflation. A recent CNBC article shows that the government is lying to you even today about the real rate of inflation. They do this so they can steal from you, plain and simple. Every dollar that they print is a direct tax against your wages and savings. They need to keep your expectations low so that you will not panic while they are gutting you. The government hides this inflation of the currency through 4 major tricks. Number 1 is hedonic adjustments. If a car goes up in price, say from $20,000 to $21,000, it would, on the face of it, show a 5% increase in the price. The government does not want that, so it creates an adjustment which takes into account the value of the options added. They arbitrarily create a dollar figure of value of, say, a better standard radio, better tires, lumbar support, upgraded cloth seats, and a dual exhaust. The government can say that that added $1,500 worth of value to that car. So when calculating for inflation, the price of the car went down 2.5% to $19,500. It does not matter if you don't want, need, or even value those options. The price goes up for you and down for the government. A trick corporations use is to say a 12-ounce can of soda is $1, and through smaller cans they are now 10 ounces and still charge you $1. You lose 17% of your soda, which costs more per ounce. The government says it's still a can of soda and it's the same price, so no inflation. Presto. The second trick they use is substitution. If inflation cannot be tamed through hedonics, they simply substitute a product in the basket with a less expensive product. Say the original basket of goods had filet mignon in it, and it went up from $9 to $10 a pound. They can simply substitute it with porterhouse steak at, say, $6 a pound, and actually say that inflation went down to eat meat. They can then substitute that with ground beef, chicken, pork, or even dog food. The very fact that people would substitute a higher product for a lesser one because of cost is clear evidence of inflation, and yet they use it to understate it. If housing remains too expensive, they use rental rates. Remember, it's all about containing your expectations. The third trick they use is weighting. When that does not work, the government changes the weighting of a hotter category with a lesser one. For example, healthcare and education are notorious for rising costs. They make up 20% of the economy. And for the CPI, the government might only weigh it as 15%, lessening the effect of the overall number. Or they might weigh certain regions of the country more than others. Or they might weigh discretionary consumables that are known to be falling in price, that we buy infrequently, and that are not vital to the necessities that we need and buy every day. The fourth trick is, when all else fails, they just don't count it at all. Left out of all these real inflation equations for the government are the most essential parts of our lives: food, energy, and taxes. I don't know about you, but these 3 things are the things that I care about most in my budget. In addition to these internal tools, the government can export inflation by sending money overseas so it never hits our economy. Also, if money can be pushed into stocks, it does not enter the real economy, and that also benefits the elite, especially when there is an orchestrated fleecing of the public through crashes. So there were the 4 tricks that the government uses to lower our expectations on inflation. They use hedonic adjustments, substitution, weighting, and subtraction. This allows the government to post benign inflation of 2.4% when the real rate is easily over 10%. So if the real rate of inflation is 4 times higher than the official CPI number of silver and gold, that would put the real high of silver at $528 and gold at $9,220. This is a much more realistic number because the money supply in the United States has been vastly increased since 1980. Using the broad component of M2, there is approximately 10 times the amount of money in the economy. So if silver was at close to $50 in 1980 times, 10 times more dollars in circulation would mean that silver is close to $500, and gold should be close to $8,500. With those numbers in mind, we are still miles away of hitting any real record in gold and silver. And this is just one factor in the price of silver. When you realize that there is a lot less silver in the world since 1980, $500 is too low. When you realize that there are 50% more people in the world since 1980, $500 silver is too low. When you realize that only about 15% of the world's population even had the opportunity to participate in the bull run of the 70s and 80s, $500 silver is too low. When you realize that there are a lot more dollars, euros, yen, yuan, and other currencies of the world since 1980, $500 silver is too low. When you realize that we are going to have a mathematically inevitable collapse of all fiat currencies, all paper assets like stocks, bonds, and real estate, silver is actually priceless. Those that understand that there is a major shift out of paper assets into real assets inevitably start with the gut reaction of buying gold. In short, gold is the gut reaction because people do not have the real understanding of why they are buying gold. Sure, they get that it's rare. They might remember their grandfather saying to buy gold, but they have not gone through the educational process to truly grasp what they are doing. When I got out of paper assets, the first thing I bought was gold. It was a gut reaction. The more that I learn about silver, the more I realize that silver was the smart decision. When I started my awakening process, I studied credit cycles and finally understood that the Federal Reserve was a privately and foreign-owned bank. I wanted to get my wealth out of their casino. Now that people are starting to wake up to this reality, they want out also. The first thing that they usually do is buy gold. Gold is the largest precious metal market in the world, and it has the most advertising behind it. People have seen it in movies as pirate treasure and may have heard that it was confiscated many years ago. I also believe that gold is very impressive to hold and feel, and it's hard not to make it your first purchase. In short, gold is the gut reaction for most paper investors who want out of the casino. The more I learned about silver, the more I saw that it was the only investment for me and my family. I am more bullish now in 2012 than I was when I bet the house on silver in 2005. When you truly understand the fundamentals behind silver, you will see that it's simply the best investment out there. And I challenge anyone to find me a better investment. First and foremost, the reason why I invested in physical silver is because it is a physical, tangible asset. When I say invest in silver, I do not mean anything else but the real stuff in your hand. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Stay away from SLV, unallocated bullion accounts, mining shares, and stick to the physical. I would hate for you to be right on silver and wrong on the form of silver. We are entering a generational shift out of paper assets into real tangible assets. As I've stated many times in the past, the dollar is mathematically going to collapse, and it is the very basis for our entire world economy. The dollar collapse will be the single largest event in human history, and will dramatically touch every human being on Earth and will leave a scar on generations to come. Yes, it's going to be that big. When the mathematically inevitable collapse happens, all paper assets will be destroyed. This goes for dollars, yen, euro, CDs, munis, T-bills, money markets, insurance policies, pensions, privately owned businesses, structured settlements, Social Security, dividends, 401ks, IRAs, stocks, options, bonds, and even real estate. Without a functioning currency and the uncertainty it brings, credit grinds to a halt, payments grind to a halt, markets grind to a halt, the world economy grinds to a halt. People panic, and this always leads to war. This naturally leads to investors finding value in real tangible assets like commodities. Commodities are real things that we use every day in our life, like pork, cotton, corn, oil, and steel. The problems with most commodities is storage. I know for a fact that two of the best asset classes to be in terms of real inflation-adjusted returns, will be food and fuel. They are most essential to humanity, and they are hardest to live without. I strongly recommend people stocking up on preparations before they buy silver. You will need at least a 3-month supply of food per person as a buffer for the massive global social upheaval we are going to go through with the collapse of the dollar. The problem with investing in most food and fuel is storage issues. Most food and fuel deteriorates and becomes worthless. Also, storage can be prohibitive because we're talking about some big dollars. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't have a grain silo or storage tanks. In extreme conditions, those that invest in food and fuel put their life at risk. People's violent response to moneyed interests that tried to speculate with people's food during times of crisis is something to consider. In 1565, one of Antwerp's richest men, Pauls van Dale, bought large amount of grain in hopes of driving up prices. When starving people found out about the stash, they rioted all over the city. Speculators and the rich were targeted with violence for their arrogance and greed. Unless you're a farmer or an oil baron, this usually rules out many commodities for the average investor. This brings us to metals because they don't deteriorate. For most metals, storage is a big issue. $8,000 will buy you a ton of copper, but just over 4 ounces of gold. This is why precious metals are sought after, because of their rarity and their ability to store so much wealth in a small space. One of the biggest reasons why people invest in precious metals is that there's no counterparty risk. Its value is derived from its intrinsic value of rarity and potential uses. With precious metals, you do not have to worry about someone paying a dividend or earnings in a depression or a currency collapse. In fact, the worse that things get in the economy, the more people will escape to precious metals and drive up its price. Once you see that precious metals are the place to be, you will need to choose between the 4 precious metals: gold, silver, platinum, and palladium. Platinum and palladium have rarity and industrial use going for them, but they've never been used as money in history. With a currency collapse, I want something that will have the most demand to drive up the price the most. I want my metal to have industrial, investment, and monetary demand. This leaves us with gold and silver as the only two rational choices for investment in the face of a mathematically inevitable worldwide currency collapse. So let's go through some of the competitive advantages of silver over gold. Number 1. Silver is the second most versatile commodity, second only to oil. With its growing technological and medical uses, its demand will be vital to any recovery we will see. Silver's unique antimicrobial, reflective, and conductive qualities make it a vital element in many high-ticket projects. Since it is so vital and used in such small quantities, its price is inelastic. If silver goes to $1,000 an ounce, Apple Computers still needs a tenth of an ounce to make their $2,000 computer work at its highest quality. They will simply raise the price $100 to make up the difference. Number 2. Silver is cheap enough for the common man to buy. With gold at $1,750, it's not really conceivable that the average American, much less most of the people in the world, will have enough money to buy even 1 ounce of gold. People are struggling to make mortgage payments, much less buy an ounce of gold. With silver at $33 an ounce, a husband can buy a couple coins without even consulting his wife. Meanwhile, if he blew $1,700 on an ounce of gold, he might have some explaining to do. And since silver is relatively cheap, the higher the price of gold goes, the more demand will naturally flow into silver. Number 3. Gold is treasured, silver is thrown away. Since the dawn of man, gold has been treasured. In more recent times, silver has been trashed as an industrial commodity and not valued as a precious metal. With the rise of technology, silver has literally been thrown away in such small quantities that it may never be recovered. In fact, the United States Geological Survey said that if current trends continue, silver will be the first element to become extinct on the periodic table. Number 4. There are no large stockpiles of silver left. Over the past decades, we have been consuming more silver every year than we mine. This is only possible because we have used up all of humanity's previously mined silver. In 1950, it was estimated that there was 10 billion ounces of major stockpiles of silver. Today, there are relatively none left. So even though that gold is 10 times more rare than silver when mined out of the earth, the fact that gold has been treasured and silver has been trashed makes the silver that is left much more rare than the 10-to-1 ratio that it naturally occurs in. The gold to silver ratio is 1 to 50. It takes approximately 50 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. If throughout all of history, for every 1 ounce of gold that has been mined, 10 ounces of silver have come out of the ground, how much longer can we expect to have a 1 to 50 ratio? If silver has been trashed for decades and gold has been treasured, how much longer can we have a 1 to 50 gold to silver ratio? If the amount of dollars invested in gold and silver at Sprott Asset Management, Gold Money, and the U.S. Mint is 1 to 1, how much longer can we have a 1 to 50 gold to silver ratio? At some point, the market's going to recognize the incredible opportunity, and when it does, it will most likely overshoot and make silver actually more valuable than gold. So, if you really want to buy gold, buy silver. You can buy 50 ounces of silver right now, and if the ratio falls to a 1-to-1 ratio, you can trade those 50 ounces of silver for 50 ounces of gold. Number 6. Silver has the largest and most persistent short position of any commodity ever. The only reason why a 1 to 50 gold to silver ratio exists is because the bankers sell paper silver into markets to suppress the price of silver, to give strength to the dollar, and the quadrillion-dollar paper empire that they rule. In May of 2011, when they crashed the silver market, they sold something like 8 billion ounces of paper silver into a market in 5 days. There is only 1 billion ounces of silver mined every year globally. This massive naked short position will unwind the day that they cannot deliver the silver that they promised. Number 7. The bankers are running out of silver and time. The COMEX registered silver inventory now stands at 35 million ounces. A little over $1 billion would completely empty the largest stockpile of silver. To put that number into perspective, last Friday the United States government increased our federal debt by $120 billion. That $1 billion of registered COMEX silver would represent 12 minutes of increased federal deficit spending. If you see that quadrillions in paper assets are going to fail, and that most commodities are not suitable for investment, and how small the silver market is, it does not take a very large stretch of the imagination to think what will happen when people try to get into this market. Since the gold market is so large, I think that we will see central banks and major institutions buying gold. But if they dumped $1 billion into silver, they would explode the market. $1 billion into the gold market would hardly make a ripple. Number 9. The majority of gold owners are bankers. If you look at the largest stockpiles of gold in the world, most of the owners are central banks of the world. The very guys that are destroying the paper markets are the largest owners of gold. There is not one central bank that I know of that even owns an ounce of silver. Since silver has been used more times as money throughout history than gold has, logic would dictate that at some point central banks are going to want to buy silver, and there's so few of it left. Number 10. Gold bullion is more reported than silver bullion. Gold is reported on twice as much in the media as silver. I would bet that if you only looked at major media, gold is probably reported 100 times more than silver, since silver is almost completely ignored. The only time I have ever seen silver reported is when we get a major smackdown in price and the mainstream propagandists strike fear in their consumer slaves on how scary the silver market is. When the dollar collapses, people will be clamoring to find answers, and they will naturally find silver. As the awareness of silver grows, so will its popularity. I believe at some point, silver will be more popular than Justin Bieber. Right now we are witnessing a silver paradigm shift. Silver buyers will no longer be guys talking about Austrian economics or momentum monkeys trying to make a quick buck trading metals. Soon it will be wide-eyed panic buying as people wake up to the fact that everything that they have ever worked for is being destroyed by the massive money creation of the world's central banks. Once people see that the only answer that bankers have is to print more money, and that the only answers politicians have is to spend more money, they will see that there is no safe place on earth to store their wealth other than real tangible assets, and no tangible asset shines brighter than silver. I predict that silver at one point will not be available for any dollar price, so you can throw away all your $50, $100, $500, or $960 price targets, because society will finally see the enormity of the fraud in the silver market. Once this fraud is exposed, no person on earth would dare let go of their silver for fiat paper money. Sure, a couple ounces might be available at the local shop, but the vast majority of silver markets will be as barren as the shelves of a post-collapse Soviet Union grocery store. This global mentality shift in asset values will lead to a paradigm shift where the world no longer wants debt money. Only real money will do in the new silver paradigm. Here are the 11 mentality shifts that I believe silver investors will go through as we enter this silver paradigm. Number 1. Physical investors who've been stacking physical silver will be stunned by the sudden appreciation. It will be akin to someone winning the lottery. They'll be shocked by the enormity of their newfound wealth, which occurs at the exact same time the economy becomes an absolute horror show. A shift in the perception of wealth will confirm that they are holding something truly precious. The years of being told that they were crazy for buying silver will finally give way to, you were right. After the shock wears off, the newly minted wealthy will seek to make the most of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. These men were astute enough to buy physical silver when everybody said that they were nuts. They are certainly not now going to give up what they have for some dirty dollars that they didn't want years ago. They will wait for something much, much better. They will not immediately seek opportunities to invest their new wealth in, because the final throes of the debt-based economy will be horrific. No one will invest when it is not certain what will happen to humanity. They will have no choice but to wait until the act plays out and the music stops. The second mentality shift will be long-term paper investors who've been sitting on the sidelines. They will rush to buy physical silver this time around. I cannot tell you how many people I know that have been literally dragging their feet buying physical silver. You know who you are. They understand why to buy, but it's just so hard for them to pull the trigger. Unfortunately, it will not be until much higher prices that they will finally pull the trigger. When they do buy, they will be joining a fast and furious rush as those fence sitters finally panic for the exits. They will see that Europe's debt problem is actually the world's debt problem. We cannot solve debt with more debt. They will see that no paper asset is safe with the amount of money printing that will occur in the next round of too big to fails. This time, the too big of fails won't be some puny billion-dollar company. It will be trillion-dollar nations. I have said that there are quadrillions in paper assets and yet only a few 100 million ounces of physical silver on the market. Right now, there's probably less than 1% invested in silver. What will the price be if it went back to the 15% of the population like it did in the 1980s? Also, those paper investors who have been sitting on the sidelines have already been burned by the MF Global scandal. No longer will they trust those markets anymore, and only physical metal will do. Number 3. Silver retailers will be stunned as people throw their fiat dollars for real tangible metals. Some bullion retailers will celebrate and sell everything that they have at higher and higher prices. They will expect to buy it back at a lower price, but this time, instead of correcting, it keeps going up. After a short while, these former precious metal players will see that the world has changed and that they were on the wrong side of the trade. They will then become one of those panic buyers that they once celebrated selling to. Number 4, the smart silver retailer will see a mentality shift of the silver buyers and take the silver off the market. It will be one of wide-eyed, sudden panic that people's entire life savings are at risk and that they need to buy silver, or any other physical asset for that matter. These new panicked buyers will not be letting go of their silver anytime soon because they will no longer trust the dollar, the stock market, the banks, or the government. The smart silver retailer will now see that the real money is not in selling the metal, but in holding the metal. The longer that they hold it, the more that they may never sell that metal for paper again. They will join the rest of the strong-handed investors that will not sell until a new monetary paradigm is established, or they can leverage their silver directly for other income-producing assets. The smart silver retailer will quit all their advertising, fire all their employees, shut down the vault, and wait. Number 5. The momentum monkeys who play the paper markets on real assets will seize upon the new mentality to drive up paper prices higher as they smell blood in the silver short water. Hedge funds will jump all over this market as they seek to squeeze every dollar out of the silver market. Vast paper wealth will be made in very short time. These momentum monkeys will fail to see that they were right on the trade, but wrong on the vehicle. The paper market will cheat them of their ultimate reward of wealth. The mentality shift in asset values will send real assets soaring at the same time all paper asset markets fail. Even if the momentum monkeys are right on their long silver bet, there is nothing stopping the COMEX from changing the rules for paper traders capping their gains. There is nothing stopping a failure of their brokerage account like MF Global or their bank as the paper market seize up. There is nothing stopping people from not accepting their paper winnings for real physical silver. There is nothing stopping the very dollars that they won from being right on the bet from not having any value at all. Number 6. Will JP Morgan end up being the ultimate silver buyer? Although JP Morgan has long been accused of being a massive short, in the final act, I do not expect JP Morgan to fall on the sword to defend a failing system. JP, along with many other banks, know full well the reality of the physical silver market. They have been perpetuating this fraud on a massive scale for years. They have kept regulators at bay by having their boys actually becoming the regulators. They know full well that they're trading 100 paper ounces to every 1 physical ounce. They're doing this because it's easy money to be made right now. During this silver paradigm shift, they will change with the wind and be the first in line for the real metal that they are in control of. These bankers will most likely shift their losing silver short positions onto some other shell company, pension fund, Federal Reserve, or most likely the taxpayers. These former silver shorts could ride the physical market all the way up. Number 7. Institutional silver sellers will take their silver off the market. Most people do not realize that the recent depletion of silver on the COMEX has not been from people buying and taking delivery of physical silver. It has been from the cancellation of warrants of sellers no longer wishing to sell. This is a huge factor in the supply side of silver that will push the price up further. Number 8. Miners will no longer seek to rush to push more real metal into the paper markets. If miners do sell their metal, they will most likely sell it in Asia where there will be a huge demand for the metal. These miners will also see that they could have huge power like OPEC or De Beers, and that there is great power in restricting the output of their product. Eric Sprott recently suggested to 11 of the top silver producers that they no longer sell their metal for paper dollars to put those dollars into a bank, that the best way to serve mining investors is for them to keep some of that metal in reserve as an asset, instead of selling it out onto the market. This is especially important because most silver is merely a byproduct of mining of other metals. Smart miners would be wise to sell their zinc and other metals and keep their silver byproduct as profit. The silver would grow in value and not be taxed. Since they never sell it, there is no tax on its increasing in value. The increasing value would be monetized through the appreciation of the stock price as their balance sheet becomes more and more attractive. Number 9. Corporations that were once comfortable with paper contracts guaranteeing delivery of their metal will want immediate physical delivery. Silver is such a strategic metal and is used in such small quantities. There are billions of dollars in corporate valuations at risk. If corporations cannot secure the basic components of their products, companies like Apple will whip out a big fat checkbook and only the real thing will do. Corporations will use their power to create a stockpile which will add to further demand. Most likely they will bypass the paper markets altogether and deal directly with the corporations who mine the silver. What a power shift that will be when tech giants have to go hat in hand to a small mining company to get their metal. Who knows, maybe these tech giants will use their wealth and buy the whole mining company. Number 10. Mining nations will make their move. So many mines are in nations that can and will, at the drop of the hat, nationalize mines. Nations will be facing tremendous social upheaval and will not hesitate to steal wealth from mines that rest in their lands. China was once the largest exporter of silver only 5 years ago and is now the largest importer of silver. Bolivia was on the verge of nationalizing its mines last May. They could now pull the trigger anytime that they want. Even in the United States, do you really think the thieves in Washington will not steal from the mines in America, or the silver on the COMEX, or SLV, or even its citizens? For the record, I do not think that they will go for little guys like us. First, the majority of silver holders are smart enough to hide their silver beyond the sight of the federales. Second, the majority of silver owners I know are former military, gun owners who don't trust the government. They will never willingly give up their silver to anyone any more than they would give up their guns, food, or children. And if they won't give it up, what are they going to do? Send a SWAT team to grab some mercury dimes that may or may not be there? That will go over well. Finally, I believe that the government will have much bigger problems on its hands, with riots, wars, and starvation, to mount any effort of confiscation. And all of this assumes that these bozos in Washington and New York even understand how important silver is. Number 11. The anti-hegemon makes its move. I have written before that there is a group of nations that have not benefited from the current world order and are seeking a way to end it. They have been very wise not to agitate the mortally wounded beast of the Anglo-American Empire. They have been sitting on the sidelines, sharpening their knives, waiting for the right time to carve up their remains. China is leading these nations with their huge dollar reserves and opening up new markets like the Pan-Asian Gold Exchange and the Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange. These nations are using their paper assets to buy real assets all over the world. China is now on every continent buying oil, farms, and mines. They do not waste their wealth on frivolous showcase properties like the Japanese did when they bought golf courses or Manhattan skyscrapers. They're buying assets that will be the basis of real power in the new paradigm. All of these mentality shifts and real asset values will ultimately lead to a silver paradigm shift in power. Those that have real assets will be the ones making the rules. Those investors who have physical metal will finally have the upper hand over the paper manipulators. Those miners will finally become more valuable than frivolous companies like Facebook. Those nations that have natural resources will have the upper hand economically over nations that have nothing else to offer but debt and death. A shift in power will be from those who produce nothing to those that produce something. Reality will take hold, and the day of something for nothing will be over for good. When this game changes, you will see that counterparty risk becomes the most important aspect of investing. Paper assets rely on another party to fulfill their end of the bargain. Real assets do not. When the world is panicking, it will be every man for themselves. There are many more powerful people higher up on the food chain that will get theirs before yours. A very wise man, Ponce, once said, "If you don't hold it, you don't own it." When this shift happens, will you be in the right place at the right time? There are 3 demands of silver that will drive silver to untold heights over the next decade. These demands will rise dramatically just as it becomes apparent the supply of silver becomes scarce. The confluence of these 2 forces will destroy the quadrillion-dollar empire of lies and the current debt war paradigm. I will show that these 3 demands occur at various stages, and the final stage is being set for the most dramatic rise in price we have ever seen. The first demand is industrial demand. First and foremost, silver is being used as an industrial metal. Silver is the indispensable metal. Next to oil, silver is the most widely used commodity ever, as it has over 10,000 uses. As technology progresses and expands, silver's usefulness will explode even further. Its unique characteristics are unlike any other commodity in the world. It is the most reflective of all metals, the greatest conductor of both heat and electricity, strongly resists corrosion and oxidation, second most malleable and ductile metal next to gold, and it has recently been discovered to be a very effective antimicrobial and bacterial metal, and is now even being used in the war against cancer. Silver is generally used in small quantities, and its unique characteristics make it irreplaceable. This makes its price inelastic. All commodities have a self-correcting price mechanism except for silver. If a commodity's price rises too high, demand drops off as people seek substitutes, or supply rises to meet demand, thus lowering the price. This mechanism does not exist with silver. Silver is typically used in very small quantities in high-tech components, and there is no substitute for it. So manufacturers and customers will absorb any price increase silver provides. The industrial demand has been the primary demand of silver over the past decades. Silver users try to keep the real physical price of silver low. When coupled with the drawdown of billions of ounces of silver stockpiles over the years, this has been relatively an easy task. The industrial demand of silver is physical, but we will see that the industrial participants want to keep the silver price low so as to make more money on their value-added goods. This demand is growing and inelastic to price, which provides a very strong base for the next demand to put some more fuel on the fire. The next demand is the growing investment demand. This demand has almost been dead for the past generation of investors. This demand has a Jekyll and Hyde component to it. It has a paper trader component to it that simply wants a horse to bet on. These investors are primarily Anglo-American institutional investors and tend to want the silver price lower. But what they really want is to get big swings in the market. They trade anywhere from 40 to 1,000 paper ounces of silver for every real physical ounce in the market, and they only usually take about 3% of the real physical off the market when it is traded. This institutional demand is still in its early stages and seems content in the paper chase of the trader market. This institutional demand is set to grow not only in acceptance, but in worldwide audience and finally in physical metal. Institutions seem to follow the leader, and when it becomes apparent that silver is up 20% a year while the stock market is flat, it won't take long for these sharks to smell blood in the water, and they'll want more exposure to silver and other commodities. At first they'll play the paper market, but soon they will want the real thing. Foreign institutional investment demand is quite different than our institutional investment demand. They don't seem interested in playing the paper chase, and they want real physical silver. They seem intent on dumping dollars for real assets. The opening of the Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange is a good example of this. During the last bull run of silver in the 80s, only Western nations participated in that market. Since then, there is 10 to 20 times more capital in the world. There are 50% more people living in the world today, and now all of the world can participate in this silver bull run. China, India, and Russia are leading the charge to buy more and more precious metals. There are a lot of potentially useless dollars floating around the world, and they want real tangible assets in return. This type of foreign institutional investment demand wants higher prices and has the potential for backing the final demand, which will catapult silver into the stratosphere. The final investment demand is private investors. These investors typically want physical and only dabble in the paper trader market. These investors buy and hold, and they differentiate themselves from the other demands that specifically want a higher price for their investment. They plan on dumping their toxic paper assets and getting real physical assets outside of the paper chase. These investors are like ants, constantly taking food off the table and storing it for a rainy day. This demand is joining the industrial demand and taking real physical metal off of the market. But unlike the industrial users, the investment demand of private investors strictly want higher prices. The final and completely absent demand in this world is monetary demand. Silver has absolutely no monetary demand in the world. It is used in things and invested for protection against inflation, but nowhere in the world can you just buy things with it. I believe that with the mathematically inevitable collapse of the worldwide currencies, this new monetary demand will push silver through the sky. Some countries or local communities will monetize silver, and as history has shown, money goes to where it's most appreciated. All of humanity will be crying out for real money as they try to recover from the fiat something-for-nothing dream. This third and final demand, of monetary demand, is insatiable, as no one can ever have too much money. We have seen that industrial demand has been the driving force behind the silver market for decades. This demand wants cheap silver so as to make more money on their finished goods. This combination of cheap prices and more uses has pushed silver inventories to the brink, which attracts the next demand. Institutional investment is just now starting to catch up with a decade of silver outperforming almost every paper market. The dominant Anglo-American investment demand has primarily wanted lower silver prices as to not take away too much power from their paper money illusion, but they really want a paper asset to bet on. The final two investment demands are just now starting to take over the market. They want higher silver prices and primarily want physical silver. These investors are surrounding the elite and will eventually take control of the entire silver market. Finally, we have the monetary demand that only wants physical and only wants higher purchasing power. The foreign institutional investors and the individual investors will be more than happy to take their physical silver and spend it wherever monetary demand is most appreciated. This will not happen until after the mathematically inevitable collapse of the world's fiat currencies. Until then, it has been a great investment, and based off of what we've seen here, the final monetary demand will push silver much, much higher. I realized very early on that using the dollar as a measuring stick was a trick the elite used to manipulate the masses. Through the insidious process of inflation, the elite can shift power from us to them. The more money they print, the less the dollar buys. When you understand that prices are not necessarily going up as much as the purchasing power of the dollar is declining, then you have made an important intellectual leap. In May of 2011, when silver got close to its 1980 high of $50 an ounce, everybody was crowing that it was the bubble top. The reality is that $50 in 1980 had a ton more purchasing power than it does now. 31 years of debt and money printing has cut the value of that $50 tremendously. If you go by the rigged Bureau and Labor Statistics numbers, adjusting for inflation, silver would have to get back to $143 an ounce just to get back to its inflation-adjusted highs from 31 years ago. If you are using real inflation-adjusted numbers, like those from John Williams at shadowstats.com, then silver needs to at least get to $450 an ounce. And that is just accounting for inflation. When you factor in decades-long physical deficits of silver, trillions of unfunded liabilities, and the mathematically inevitable worldwide fiat currency collapse, the case for silver is even stronger. I knew the dollar could not be trusted as a measuring stick, so I started to search for something else to guide me. I found that ratio investing was the best way of overcoming this dollar-centric view of the world. The idea is simply taking the currency out of the equation and simply divide asset by asset to get its ratio of purchasing power. It is also important to use this line of thinking when you look back in history to make historical analysis of real purchasing power of silver, as we have seen with my historical case of $960 silver. Most importantly, this line of thinking will help you see values that we are investing for in a post-dollar world. So here are the 3 big charts that I watched for silver for the past 7 years. The first chart is the one that literally got me to bet the house on silver in 2005. When I got out, the ratio was 42,000 ounces of silver for the average house. Now it is close to 6,000 ounces for the average house. Using the ratio, so far the real purchasing power of silver has gone up over 600%. That's great and all, but I believe that we have much further to go. I can tell you from first-hand experience that we are nowhere near the bottom of housing. First, until jobs come back, there will never be a recovery in housing. There is a huge shadow inventory in housing of either foreclosed homes held off the market or homes where people have not paid their mortgages in years. Then there's the whole MERS mess, the mortgage electronic registration system that has not been resolved. Think about how many houses were sold with fraudulent documents. I mean, would you feel comfortable buying a house with a title that the bank may not even own? We also have ridiculously low interest rates that are artificially supporting the housing market. I'm not that old, but I seem to remember when 3.9 was a pretty good deal on 60-month financing on a car, and now we have that for 30-year mortgages. If you are like me and believe that inflation is running at 10+% in the real world, when you factor in the stuff that the Federal Reserve does not, like food and fuel, you actually have negative interest rates in housing. Even with this incredible artificial support, we are now starting to look at a double dip in the housing market. Let's get 2 steps ahead of the crowd. Say things do go to hell in a handbasket. The dollar crashes, interest rates skyrocket, necessities like food and fuel moonshot, wars, civil unrest, cats and dogs are friends, mass hysteria. What would that do to housing? At the very least, it would make it impossible to finance your house. What's your house worth without a 30-year mortgage? If you have a house that is worth $250,000 and interest rates that are at 4.9%, and for argument's sake, say that we did not have to factor down payment, taxes, or maintenance, your payment would be $1,316 a month. That is maybe something that people can afford right now. What if we go through this dollar collapse scenario, which I believe is 100% mathematically inevitable, and you are lucky to find a couple that can afford that payment and they're willing to buy your house, but say now interest rates are at 10%. You would have to sell that house for $150,000 to get that exact same payment. You see, people don't buy homes or cars based off of the asset. They buy it based off of the monthly payments. What if interest rates went to 20%? That would drop that $250,000 home to $80,000. And all of that is contingent on that couple even having a job or a down payment or being creditworthy, which is becoming increasingly harder to find. I also believe that during this collapse environment, local governments will become so desperate that they will be raising property taxes on a declining housing market. We are 3 years into this housing depression, and most property taxes have either stayed the same or are higher than they were at the bubble. Another factor to consider is what is a McMansion worth if the cost to run the house goes up. $1,000 a month in water or electricity bills would certainly cramp any housing price. What if jobs don't come back and more people go to live at home with their parents? What if we go back to multi-generational housing? That would leave a lot of inventory on the market in addition to the huge overhang from the last bubble. One other thing to consider is your safety. What is your property worth in a city during riots or worse? The time to buy property is when there's blood on the streets. Baron Rothschild. So real estate is out in my book. The average home price is about $246,000. The 200-day moving average of silver is at $36. So we are at a 1 to 6,833 house to silver ratio. Judging by my first chart, we could still see a 400% real return still in the house to silver ratio just to get back to the 1980 high where the average house was $72,400 and silver popped to a $50 high, which would make that ratio 1 to 1,448. I still think there is a very strong case that we could blow by that because we are in much worse shape as a country than we were in 1980. The next big chart I look at is the Dow to silver ratio, and we are just now getting back to the mean average of the Dow to silver ratio. This is after 10 years of silver outperforming stocks. At silver's 1980 peak, it reached a 1 to 18 Dow to silver ratio. That would almost be a 2,000% real return in purchasing power if we were to go to that ratio again. I would argue again that we are in a much worse scenario than we were in 1980. This market is now admittedly being propped up by the plunge protection team and high-frequency robo-trading. The Greenspan put of the 90s has turned into the Bernanke guarantee. The average dividend of Dow stocks is a paltry 2.6%, which after taxes and inflation is nothing. The Dow is double what it was in the middle of the crisis of 2008. If we go through the same kind of crisis this time, there will be no safety nets of savings that we did last time. On top of that, having my money sitting in a brokerage account in Wall Street does not sit well with me, especially after the MF Global scandal. The final chart I look at is the gold to silver ratio. Once again, we are just getting past the mean average. If we go to the 1980 high, we could still see a rise in real purchasing power against gold. The ratio that gold and silver come out of the ground is 1 ounce of gold for every 10 ounces of silver. And yet there is a 1-to-1 ratio in the amount of dollars that goes into gold and silver with Sprott Asset Management, gold money, and even the U.S. Mint bullion sales. We understand that gold has been treasured as a precious metal and silver has been trashed as an industrial metal for decades. On top of all of this, the paper manipulation on Wall Street, with the Andrew Maguire testimony, I think we will overshoot the 1980 high of the 1 to 14 ratio. Finally, we have the mathematically inevitable collapse of the dollar. When this happens, all paper assets will get burned. Only real tangible assets will thrive. I cannot find another asset that has the opportunity that silver presents us today. When the day does come, when I find another attractive asset class, I will use my tax-free strategy that I present in the Ultimate Exit Strategy to plow my real purchasing power into a new asset. Until then, I will keep my eye on these 3 charts and keep holding my physical silver.
Why 什么强大的国家都会走向灭亡呢？古希腊、罗马帝国、不列颠帝国、美国，因为他们都犯同样的错误，与原来使得他们成功的原则背道而驰。
Despite recent setbacks in the stock market, housing market, and your current economic situation, it is not still too late to dream about retirement. The collapse of the dollar will be the single largest event in human history. It is a mathematical certainty that it will collapse. It will either be an outright default, as the increasing interest on the debt becomes too large to even pay the minimum payment, or the more likely scenario, that we will pay our debts with worthless money into hyperinflation. Every aspect of a person's life will be dramatically affected as people learn what counterparty risk is to a paper asset. Wealth will be transferred from paper assets to tangible assets. People must understand that hyperinflation is not necessarily a financial event. It is a psychological event, one which people change their perception of wealth from paper to tangible. Understanding that the collapse is going to happen, and that it will be the single largest event in human history leaves you with one choice: denial or prepare. There is great news about this collapse. Those that saw this coming will know what to do when it gets here. I spent 7 years researching and preparing for this project in order to understand every aspect of this inevitability. I wanted to know how our world worked, who created it, how they came to power, and what was coming. I am compiling all this work into this video series to help people go through the 5 stages of awakening so that they can become aware and prepared. This awareness is absolutely vital before you do anything. If you do not understand why you're doing what you're doing, you will either not do it or be swayed off course during the coming turmoil. I highly recommend that you take the time to go through this video series properly. Once you are aware, it is time to prepare. The paradigm shift from paper assets to tangible assets is pretty simple when you think about it. All paper wealth is not real. It is a promise to pay. This promise to pay works in a peaceful, growing environment. Eventually, we get to the point where everything starts to fall apart and people cannot keep their promises. Now, we're getting to the point where people won't keep their promises. For the most part, this can be papered over for a while by bailouts and printing money, but eventually that leads to the collapse of the currency as a store of value, and that takes down all other paper assets. Paper assets exist in our mind and not in the real world. They work so long as the paradigm that they were created in still exists. Our paradigm is built off the ability to print the world's reserve currency, to create unlimited debts, to run a global military empire, to secure the world's resources and shipping lanes for our corporations to harvest. With the collapse of the dollar, all of that ends.
美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退，巨额的所谓刺激开支、庞大的医疗改革、政府接管私有企业、债务累累。
Tangible assets are real things that you can touch and have intrinsic value. Water, food, guns, tools, etc. are all things that you use in your daily life. You're going to need a buffer of supplies to deal with the violent transition society is going to go through after the collapse of the dollar. This buffer will be the things that you need and the means to protect them. Once you feel comfortable and you want to invest for the future, silver becomes the only obvious choice. Most people dream about retirement. Sadly, the average baby boomer only has about $88,000 in retirement savings. Baby boomers are going to have the hardest time transitioning into this new paradigm, after sacrificing the best years of their lives chasing after a paper paradigm that is going to fail them the moment that they reach for it. Most boomers will not be able to deal with the coming collapse, as they had already been hurt once in the stock market bubble, the housing bubble. The final debt bubble may be too much for most to live through. $88,000 may not be enough to retire on, but I do think that there is an opportunity, given this coming collapse and this paradigm shift, that baby boomers have one last shot at securing their future. For $34,000, the average baby boomer could get 1,000 ounces of silver. I have already shown in previous videos that throughout all of history and 2/3 of the world today, 1/10 of an ounce of silver represents 12 hours of hard human labor. Using this blood, sweat, and tears ratio of silver, it is very easy to see that 1,000 ounces would be the equivalent of 10,000 days of hard human labor. Think about how relatively easy an American could accumulate that much silver. The rest of the world, that we are being driven to compete against in a global race to slave labor, cannot even begin to think about buying that much silver, ever. And yet, for about half of what the average baby boomer has in their retirement account, they can accumulate what most of humanity could only dream of.
接管私有企业，债务累累。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
One of the most important things in the world to understand right now is that prices are not going up. It is the value of your money going down. The more money and debt spent by the federal government and the more money and debt that is created out of thin air by the privately owned Federal Reserve, the less value your dollars have.
You're in charge. You're in charge of this thing called the United States government / budget, and it gives you political and fiscal authority to do, quote unquote, the right thing.
Yeah.
Would you mark to market balance sheets today and create the economic downside that would follow, or would you put in place or attempt to put in place some kind of economic policies to get you to a better place down some theoretical road?
I mean, how do you solve a problem where you're spending 10% of, you're running a 10% fiscal deficit? You're not going to get growth in the absence of private sector credit demand. So the government's idea right now is we're going to export our way out of this. And when I asked a senior member of the Obama administration last week, how are we going to grow exports if we won't allow nominal wage deflation? And he says, we're just going to kill the dollar. And I said, okay, more you mean. So that's the only answer.
That's a dead answer.
It's a dead answer. but that's where we're headed.
As a direct result from this money and debt creation, you need more dollars to buy the exact same amount of goods as you did before. When you understand this concept, it does not take too long till you figure out that your wealth is being stolen by a bunch of well-dressed criminals every day. The best way to protect yourself from this thievery is to sell all of your paper assets and buy physical, tangible assets that have no counterparty risk. The wonderful thing about the Silver Bullet and Silver Shield plan is, when you own tangible assets like silver, the more that they print, the higher your assets go. This should, at the very least, protect your purchasing power and at the most create tremendous amount of real wealth. Before Nixon closed the gold window in 1971 and before 1964 when the government took our silver out of our coins, a gallon of gas for about 50 years was about 25 cents a gallon. This was because you were selling essentially one tangible asset, your silver quarter, for another tangible asset, a gallon of gas. Without having a debt-based currency, the measuring stick of the dollar never stretched for more than 50 years. As soon as we got off the silver and gold standard, this freed the bankers and the politicians to create more and more debt and money, and that has destroyed our purchasing power of the dollar. I believe that we are going to see $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 for a gallon of gas, not because of peak oil or some revolution in the Middle East. I believe that this will happen because the money supply, which is a much larger threat to your well-being, is exploding, and that it will destroy every dollar you have ever worked for. From 1920 to 1964, a gallon of gas could be bought for a single 90% silver quarter. In 2010, when gas was about $3 a gallon, guess how much those same 90% silver quarters are worth? You guessed it, about $3. Do you want to know what that 90% silver quarter is worth today? You can go to a site called coinflation.com. And right now, that same quarter is going for about $6. The reality is that gas is not going up in terms of real money like silver. Here's another example of how to look at it. A gas station in Ashland, Oregon was selling a gallon of gas for 20 cents. But if you look at the sign, it specifically says if paid with pre-1964 dimes, quarters, half, or dollar coins. This is a great way to educate people about how much our currency has been debased. As you all know, the price of gasoline has not gone up as much as our currency has been destroyed by the exponential money printing diluting the value of our money. The obvious result of this inflation is that we need more worth less dollars to buy the exact same amount of goods and services. If you realize that decades before silver was taken out of our money in 1964, after JFK was murdered, an executive order 11110 was thrown out, a gallon of gasoline sold for about 25 cents. The reality is, this is a good deal historically speaking. I believe that silver is telling us that there is a lot more inflation on the way. Right now, that silver quarter is worth about $6, and I believe it'll go much higher than that. In fact, I believe it'll get to the point where you will not be able to exchange dollars for gasoline, because those countries and companies that sell gas will realize that the store value of the dollar is completely worthless, and they will not sell their precious resource for something that can be printed out of thin air. When that reality hits the world, only people who have silver will be able to buy gasoline. There will come a time when the dollar's value will decline so much that people will be begging for real silver. Silver has been trashed for decades as an industrial metal and not valued as a precious metal. This industrial use and supply deficit has destroyed most of the above-ground stocks of real physical silver. Now investment demand is starting to pick up to protect against the destruction of paper assets. This investment demand alone will send silver's value to the moon, quadrillions of paper wealth tries to find its safety into real tangible assets. The final hyperdrive for silver will be when people demand real money as their fiat money dies. This is when the purchasing power of silver will dramatically increase. There will be direct transaction of silver for real goods and services like this gas station shows. People will no longer fear the government like they do now. People will see that they have been raped by the criminal elite and do anything and everything to survive and not get fooled again. I would like to tell you the real story of the Hunt brothers. Unlike everything that you have heard, they were not out to corner the market to make some quick profits. They were out to do what you are probably doing today. The Silver Bullet and the Silver Shield is the idea that you should be selling all of your paper assets and buying real physical silver. This physical silver will act as a silver bullet against all the things that are wrong with this world, and will act as a silver shield to protect your wealth. Quite simply, what the Hunts were doing was exactly that. They were out to protect their wealth, change the balance of power away from the bankers and politicians that were sliding the country into a collectivist nightmare back in the 70s. The Hunts were very successful and patriotic men that deeply believe that our republic is the best system ever devised on earth, and it offers opportunities to all. They despised the Washington and Wall Street establishment that was headed by their arch nemesis, the Rockefellers. The Hunts were also a huge benefactor in the early stages of the Libertarian Party that Ron Paul seems to epitomize today. Bunker Hunt was an enthusiastic proponent of the idea that all currency should be backed by precious metals like gold and silver. The advantage of remonetization of gold and silver, as the concept is known, the governments cannot casually print money to pay for deficits in their spending unless they have sufficient gold or silver to spend. Since precious metals are in limited supply, remonetization acts as a brake to government spending, which they clearly saw with the guns and butter programs of the 1970s. The Hunts sought to create a silver cartel, similar to that of OPEC, that would shake the debt-based financial establishment of Washington and Wall Street. Bunker Hunt thought of a way to make this happen by issuing silver-backed bonds that could be redeemed for silver instead of cash. There was even rumors that they wanted the Republic of Texas to create their own silver money in the face of runaway inflation from Washington and Wall Street. Bunker Hunt simply wanted assets that came from the earth that were needed for industry rather than a paper fortune that was steadily depreciating under the weight of dollar bills flowing from the printing presses at the Treasury. They were particularly sensitive to this since their oil contracts were denominated in dollars. During the 1970s, the Hunt brothers were heavy hitters betting one big business deal after another, including oil, real estate, for which they had 5 million acres throughout the world, cattle, sugar, football, and even pizza parlors. Their Libyan oil leases of the late 1960s and early 70s were bringing in $30 million a year in revenues, even when oil was at $3 a barrel. In 1970, when silver was $1.50 an ounce, Bunker Hunt decided to invest there as well. At the time, it was illegal for U.S. citizens to own gold, so silver became the natural second choice. Inflation was starting to gain steam. Vietnam was causing doubts about our government and riots in our country. The Middle East was a powder keg, and Libya, along with their valuable oil field, was in transition. Bunker personally believed that the worldwide situation was going to get worse, and as a result decided to hedge his assets. But with the usual Hunt flair for pushing all of his chips out onto the table, it did not take long for a hedge to become a very large position. Herbert Hunt first became interested in silver after reading Silver Profits in the 70s by Jerome Smith. The premise of the book was that the government was clearly following the Keynesian model of economics that would print money to debase the currency and ultimately destroy the dollar. Herbert felt that once the dollar died, the republic would die also. Jerome Smith stated that the decline of the dollar would be the first worldwide runaway inflation and depression in the history of the world. He said, quote, "The world monetary system is on a collision course with chaos. The solution is contained in the problem. One can protect oneself from the forces of destruction by converting those resources that are denominated in paper money into hard assets, into real value, preferably into assets whose values are not subject to arbitrary management by anyone, ideally assets that are both hard and highly liquid, into real money like gold and silver." The Hunts also learned that when demand rose for silver, the price would continue to rise, as its price is inelastic. They saw silver as a perfect investment, for it was a silver bullet to the collectivist establishment on Washington and Wall Street headed by the Rockefellers, and a silver shield to protect their assets as they transitioned. After reading Jerome Smith's book in 1973, Bunker and Herbert Hunt purchased 200,000 ounces of silver, and they saw their silver increase from $1.50 an ounce to $3 an ounce. At the same time, Colonel Gaddafi in Libya shut down British Petroleum and nationalized Bunker Hunt's wells. The major oil companies soon afterwards caved in. The first to break with the major oil companies was Arm & Hammer at Occidental Petroleum, when he gave in to Gaddafi's demands for 51% royalty payment. After Arm & Hammer caved, the other oil companies lined up and gave in as well. The results were an empowerment over major oil companies the Middle East countries had never experienced, and that emboldened them to form OPEC and the oil embargo in 1973. Bunker Hunt grew angry at the State Department's lack of support for his lost Libyan oil fields and hired John Connolly to help negotiate with the Libyans without any success. He blamed the big oil companies for using him as a sacrificial lamb in Libya and then hung him out to dry on his own. At the head of the major oil companies were the Hunts' arch enemies, the Rockefellers. Bunker Hunt felt that Washington and New York Eastern establishment was being led down the road to socialism by the Rockefellers.
You know, I think Pat's coming quickly. Soon I think he's going to be in a position for the Trilateral Commission. And if he shows promise beyond that, there's Bilderberg. World control, Pat. Settle for nothing else.
With inflation eating at his Libyan profits, and then ultimately no more to come, Bunker started buying silver in a big way with his brother Herbert. In 1973, they started buying By early 1974, they had accumulated silver contracts totaling 55 million ounces, or about 8% of the world's supply of silver at the time. The brothers then took delivery of all 55 million ounces of silver. Bunker was concerned about government confiscation of his silver. He could not bring it to Texas without paying a 5% franchise tax to the state, so the brothers decided to pick up their silver and drop it off into Switzerland for safekeeping. Meanwhile, back at the Circle K Ranch, brother-in-law Randy Creeling and his brother Tillman was holding a shooting contest amongst the cowboys to find the best marksman. The dozen best marksmen were hired for a special assignment to ride shotgun on the world's largest private silver transfers in history. The Circle K Cowboys flew on 3 specially chartered 707 jets to Chicago and New York, where they were met by a convoy of armored trucks delivering them in the middle of the night 40 million ounces of silver that was loaded onto the planes, and they immediately flew to Zurich, where they were met by another convoy of armored trucks. The Cowboys loaded the trucks and the silver and dispersed it to 6 different storage locations in Switzerland. The transfer cost for Bunker and Herbert was $200,000. The storage cost for the 40 million ounces in Switzerland and the 15 million ounces still in the United States amounted to $3 million a year. By the spring of 1974, silver rose to $6 an ounce, and rumors were flying around that Hunts were trying to corner the silver market. At the time, annual production was about 245 million ounces, and the annual demand was 450 million ounces. The Hunt brothers just took delivery of 55 million ounces. The big question was, how much silver was out in private hands? Of the estimated 700 million ounces of silver, only about 200 million ounces was available for delivery against the futures contracts. That same spring, Bunker appeared on the floor of the COMEX in New York for the first time and declared that almost anything is better than paper money, and that any fool can run a printing press. The silver market dropped to the $3 and $4 range after that, but Bunker and Herbert just held on and worked other deals. Herbert's real estate deals in North Dallas were paying him handsomely during the 70s, while Bunker's racehorse business did well. Penrod Drilling was expanding all over the world and moving quickly to offshore rigs. Hunt Oil's other holdings were increasing in value as the worldwide price of oil escalated. In March of 1975, Bunker Hunt flew to Tehran to meet with the Shah's brother about purchasing silver. Bunker and Herbert still had their 55 million ounces of silver, and the price was walling around $4 an ounce. In spite of the fact that the boys were a little short on cash at the time, Bunker felt that if Herbert could take on a partner to resume the purchasing of silver, the price would rocket upwards. He met with the Iranian finance minister and suggested that the Pahlavi family invest in several million ounces of silver. The finance minister was not familiar with Bunker and asked him how much money he made. Bunker hesitated because, as a private individual, he was always downplaying his income as much as possible for tax purposes. He finally said somewhere around $50 million a year he was making. Bunker's hesitation put off the minister, and the deal never went through. Not to be discouraged, Bunker set up a meeting with King Faisal of Saudi Arabia in mid-April. But in late March, the king was assassinated by his nephew, and the meeting never happened. In the fall of 1976, Bunker and Herbert took delivery of 20 million ounces of silver through a public company they controlled called Great Western United. Great Western was a part of H.L. Hunt's food division that mainly dealt in sugar and sugar futures. The brothers quickly devised a swap where Great Western could trade 20 million ounces of silver to the Philippines for sugar for their refineries. The Philippines would then trade the silver to the Saudis for oil. Herbert flew to the Philippines and worked out the deal with President Marcos, but at the last minute the IMF killed the deal. The IMF would not recognize silver as an asset of the Philippine government and would refuse other loans as a result. The deal fell through, and the brothers sold 20 million ounces of silver the next year. Once again, Bunker felt thwarted by the Eastern establishment headed by the Rockefellers. In the spring of 1977, the brothers attempted to take over the largest silver mine in the United States, the Sunshine Silver Mine, through Great Western United. They succeeded in acquiring 28% of the stock, with an option to purchase the balance at a later date. They then turned to another commodity play and invested in soybeans. They were a little short on cash, so they used their silver as collateral. As usual, the brothers went into the market a big way. The legal limit for a single investor was 3 million bushels. The brothers brought in other family members and had a total stake of 22 million bushels. The CFTC cried foul and filed suit against the Hunts. The Hunts claimed that other large families did the same thing to get around the 3 million bushel limit, and since they were not part of the Eastern liberal crowd, they were being unfairly targeted. After the smoke cleared, they still made $40 million profit on their soybean futures. They were fast gaining a reputation for playing fast and loose with the rules concerning the commodities trading. By the late 1970s, the Hunt first family fortune was estimated to be in the range of $6 to $8 billion. In 1978, John Connolly introduced Bunker to a Saudi sheikh at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington. A year later, International Metals Investment was incorporated in Bermuda between Bunker, Herbert, and the two Saudi sheiks. It's speculated that the two Saudi sheiks were actually fronting for a member of the Saudi royal family. In early 1979, the price of silver rose steadily to $8, and the Sunshine Mine deal fell apart. The stockholders demanded more money for the balance of the purchase since the mine was now worth more due to the increase in silver. The Hunts' tender offer failed. They sold their interest back to the management trust. In the summer of 1979, the Hunt brothers started buying silver through the International Metals Investment Group, along with their Saudi partners. Over 43 million ounces of silver contracts were purchased through the COMEX and the CBOT, with delivery to be taken that fall. In the fall of 1979, the price of silver doubled from $8 to $16 in only 2 months. Other syndicates with big money behind them started buying silver. The COMEX and the CBOT started to panic. In 1979, the warehouses of the two exchanges only held 120 million ounces of silver, and that was the amount that was traded in October alone. Many people, including the Hunts through their International Metal Investment Group, were taking delivery on all of their contracts. October 6, 1979, Paul Volcker introduced the first stage of anti-inflationary measures when the Federal Reserve requested that the American banks avoid loans for speculation, especially in commodities. The brothers were starting to fear another confiscation by the United States government, FDR style, since things were coming to a head. Late 1979, the CBOT changed the rules and stated no investor could hold more than 3 million ounces of silver contracts, and the margin requirement was to be raised. All contracts over 3 million ounces per trader must be liquidated by February of 1980. Bunker Hunt accused the COMEX and the CBOT board members of having financial interest in the silver market themselves. Investigations later found that many had substantial silver short positions and were hemorrhaging money as Bunker sought to squeeze the market. Bunker knew that a shortage now existed, or they would not be screaming so loudly. He bought even more. The price on the last day of 1979 was $34.45. At this point, Bunker and Herbert held 40 million ounces in Switzerland and 90 million ounces of bullion they jointly owned through International Metals. In addition to all of that, International Metals had contracts for another 90 million ounces due for March delivery from the COMEX. The younger brother, Lamar, had even entered the arena and had taken a $300 million silver position by the end of 1979. Finally, on January 7th of 1980, the COMEX changed the rules to only allow 10 million ounces of contracts per trader, and that contracts over that amount must be liquidated before February 18th. The CFTC promptly backed up that ruling. On January 17th, silver hit $50, and Bunker continued to buy. At that point in time, the Hunt silver position was worth over $4.5 billion, bringing their profits into silver at $3.5 billion. On January 21st, the COMEX announced that they were suspending trading of silver, they would only accept liquidation orders, and silver dropped $10 an ounce and stayed around $39 until the end of January. Scrap silver, old silver coins, and silverware came into the market, about 22 million ounces in all. In early February, the Hunt Group took delivery of another 26 million ounces from Chicago. The Hunt's North Sea oil through Placid Oil was coming online, and they would be generating $200 million a year from that venture alone. There was also talk of them taking over Texaco Oil. Bunker was also talking with Middle Eastern rulers about putting together another silver buying group. By March 14th, silver was down to $21 an ounce. Paul Volcker had raised interest rates and the dollar had firmed up. This made borrowing to speculate on silver even more expensive. International Metals held 60 million ounces of future contracts. Their margin call on those contracts amounted to more than $10 million a day. Bunker still believed that it would go back up if he could only promote more buying. He scrambled around Europe looking for a buying partner, but the more the price dropped, the harder it was to borrow money against his silver holdings to buy even more silver to hold the price up. Finally, on March 25th of 1980, the Hunt brothers ran out of cash. Bunker, Hunt, and Herbert simply said, "Shut it down." Herbert promptly told his broker the following morning that they could not meet their $135 million margin call that day. The Hunt's brokers promptly sold $100 million worth of silver that day. Their account alone had $90 million worth of equity, and they were expected to lose it all the next day. The CFTC chairman, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and the United States Treasury Secretary began round-the-clock silver monitoring sessions. On March 27th, Silver Thursday, silver opened up at $15.80 and closed down at $10.80. The stock market crashed on rumors that the Hunt's liquidations of stocks to cover the silver losses, and then rallied to close above the same level. The next day, silver rallied back up to $12. The Hunt's bullion purchases were all averaged around $10, but their futures contracts were purchased around $35. When it was all over, they owed $1.5 billion. On April 2, 1980, the Hunts owned over 158 million ounces of silver. The Federal Reserve Chairman, Paul Volcker, gave approval for a bailout plan for the brothers, fearing a financial disaster. A group of banks agreed to loan the brothers $1.1 billion. The family had to put up $8 billion in collateral with the banks. After the smoke cleared, it appeared that the drama was not just a one-sided manipulation by the Hunts. The shorts in the Eastern establishment had just as much at stake as the Hunts did. By the mid-1980s, silver was bumping around $17 an ounce again. Shortly thereafter, Reagan came into the presidency and a new optimism gripped the country. In 1988, Bunker filed for personal bankruptcy. In 1989, he left bankruptcy with a net worth of $5 to $10 million and a debt to the IRS of $90 million to be repaid over 15 years. The Bunker's trusts, set up by his father, H.L. Hunt, were currently valued at $200 million. In 2003, they finally made their last payment to the IRS. One thing people should note is that for all the action in the silver market that the Hunts were doing, it had nothing to do with the gold market, which was clearly responding to the seizure of hostages in Tehran, the occupation of the Great Mosque in Mecca, and the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. The week that Russia invaded Afghanistan, silver rose 50% alone that week, from $24 to $36. Bunker later said that it was almost like the silver shorts had the power to manipulate the market, break the market, cost the longs a lot of money, and then turn the media on the longs and brand them as speculators. He thought the media would have been more discerning, but apparently the shorts had a lot of influence on them. I feel there are a lot of lessons here that we can take away from the Hunt story. First and foremost, take possession. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. By taking physical delivery of your metal, it takes away the basis of the illusion. The paper market controls the physical market so long as people believe that these paper contracts actually have physical metal backing them up. Every ounce of metal that leaves their hands has a deleveraging quality to it, meaning that for every one physical ounce, there could be hundreds or thousands of paper ounces that trade upon that. At some point, they will no longer be able to keep up the physical reality of their paper illusion. The other important aspect of taking physical delivery is that this has no counterparty risk. By paying cash and taking delivery of your metal, you do not run the risk of a brokerage firm going bad, a currency becoming worthless, or a market not being able to deliver the metal they promised. If the problem is a fiat illusion, then the solution must be of the opposite consciousness. It must be a physical reality. Do not use leverage. By taking on debt to buy physical silver, you run the risk of being forced out of the market. Markets can remain irrational a lot longer than you and I can remain solvent. Gary Schilling. By not using leverage and only paying cash, you do not have to worry about the ups and downs that violently move this market. There's a saying, you cannot cheat an honest man, and holding honest money is the best way not to be cheated. Also, by using leverage, you are playing their game. Everything they do has leverage. Leverage corrupts. So once again, the answer lies in the opposite consciousness. Also, when you don't use leverage, it is a less emotional decision to buy and sell your metal. Having physical metal and seeing the physical reality that went into producing that metal keeps people from making irrational, emotional decisions in the heat of the battle. We are playing for the single largest event in human history, the mathematical collapse of the dollar, and by buying physical metal, it helps you keep your eye on the prize. As we can see in the Hunt story, silver is the Achilles heel of the elite's paradigm. Without the ability to print unlimited amount of money to control the world's banks, corporations, governments, militaries, and citizens, the elite would be powerless. Take away their ability to create money, and you take away their ability to project power. Simply seeing the amount of power that was drawn to bear to stop two men from buying physical silver should be clue enough for us all to commit to buying physical silver. The Hunt story also shows how inelastic the price of silver is. When they first started buying, it was $1.50 an ounce. Every time that they made major purchases, the price of silver doubled. The higher the quantity they purchased, the higher the price it went. The fundamentals that were true in the 70s are even more true today. There is far less silver in the world than there was back in 1970, and there's far more money now than there was back in 1980. I think another important point of the Hunt story is that you cannot defeat a collectivist power through central ownership of a metal. Because the Hunts were the major players in the market, all the elite needed to do was to take them down, and the silver market took decades to recover. The only true solution is decentralized, non-violent, non-compliant, leaderless resistance, buying and stacking silver on a local level. Knowing that there is so much power derived off of this single metal, you cannot play in their casino or by their rules. So long as you play by the elite's rules, they will rule. The Hunts had a pretty good idea about how powerful the Rockefellers were, and yet time and time again, they were outmaneuvered by the Rockefellers, both domestically, institutionally, and internationally. The only way to defeat a power like that is to change the rules and work outside the system. You cannot expect to get a fair fight when they own the referees and can change the rules whenever they see fit. There is far too much power at risk. The closer you get to your target, the more dangerous it will become. When you truly understand who and what you're up against, the criminal elite will stop at nothing to ensure their power. These are men that are complicit in genocide and the theft of the wealth of nations. They are known for changing the rules and changing your reality. That is why the best course of action is to do something outside of their area of expertise. They thrive in secrecy. We must expose them and share this information. They thrive in a centralized fiat system. We must take decentralized action and buy physical. They gain power by spreading debt and death throughout the world. We must secure our future with real, tangible equity and sharing information with peace and understanding. For the major silver players out there, do not underestimate what you are going up against. The Hunt brothers knew full well that they were dealing head-on with the Rockefellers, and yet they decided to play in their casino in the markets that Washington and Wall Street controlled. Even overseas, the New York and Washington establishment has a lot of power, as seen with the assassination of King Faisal and the failed deal with President Marcos when the IMF killed the deal. The Hunts also sought to get a fair trial in the media, which of course is controlled by the New York and Washington crowd. As I showed in The Greatest Truth Never Told, you cannot solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. What the Hunt brothers were trying to do with their Silver Bullet and Silver Shield plan is something that we can all do together. Collectively, we can have just as much influence as the Hunts did, except there's no way to stop us. As the Hunt brothers' story showed, by taking physical delivery, we can play outside the rules and provide a non-violent, non-compliance shift in power that will change the world forever. It is very important to understand that the manipulation of the gold and silver market is a very deliberate one by those that seek to enslave you. If the paper price of silver and gold are severely lower than their actual value, the paper money that the United States and its banks issue is theoretically more valuable relative to gold and silver than it really is. If you push down the price of metals, the US dollar and all of the paper assets that it underlies goes up. This is our current situation, and things that cannot go on forever won't. The Hunt brothers were not the last billionaire to make a move on silver. Warren Buffett bought 130 million ounces, or roughly 1/5 of the world's inventory at the time, in 1997. He held that position all the way until 2006. My question is, why is the richest man in the world, who's known for buy and hold and finding permanent value, be scared out of his position? The only comment I ever found disclosing what happened to this trade was Warren Buffett saying, "I bought it very early, I sold it very early. Other than that, it was perfect." Now, I have no proof of this, but I am willing to speculate that at the exact same time that Warren Buffett was forced out of his silver position, he was heavily involved with the AIG scandal with Hank Greenberg. Warren Buffett's General Re took the other side of a lot of shady AIG positions. The deals ended Hank Greenberg in 2005, and yet Warren Buffett escaped with only a $50 million slap on the wrist. Is it out of the realm of possibility to say that Warren Buffett was feeling the heat and offered the elitist insiders his stash of silver to get out of the kitchen? The timing and situation is way too coincidental. And all of this was before AIG stole $186 billion in the biggest bankster bailout ever.
Sure. Tim Geithner was the president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank in the fall of 2008. When the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and the White House and the Congress decided to bail out AIG.
Right.
In the process of that bailing out of AIG, many documents were exchanged. If you went to the bank to borrow money, you'd have to fill out documents. One of the documents AIG filled out said, "We owe X dollars to Goldman Sachs, and we plan on paying them 100 cents on the dollar." According to Bloomberg, emails that came out yesterday say that lawyers for the Federal Reserve Bank said, we were told to strike this from the form so that AIG would not reveal to the Treasury Department or to the public that this money was going to be paid to Goldman Sachs because that's a politically toxic issue. Goldman Sachs making a fortune, making 100 cents on the dollar with federal funds. Now, if you go to buy a $25 savings bond from the federal government and you falsify the document to acquire that bond, you can go to jail.
That's right.
If you borrow $185 billion from the government, like AIG did, and you falsify a document, even if the government told you to do so, the people involved can go to jail. According to Bloomberg, one of the people who told them to do so was the now Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner.
And coincidentally, at the exact same time that Warren Buffett supposedly sold his silver, Barclays started the SLV ETF with, guess what, 130 million ounces. I have to admit, I was quite excited when SLV came onto the market in 2006. I love the idea of buying physical silver with the ease of buying a stock. However, it did not take long for rumors to come out that there was not enough physical silver backing the shares and that JP Morgan and HSBC, the largest shorts in the silver market, were also the custodians of that SLV. I then saw SLV as a paper scam to siphon off investment demand out of the physical metal and into another paper Ponzi scheme. SLV in a few short years has increased its reserves to 16 times the original inventory at its inception. I have seen weeks when SLV added 523 tons in 1 week to its inventory and the price of silver didn't move at all. That confirmed my suspicions. Since I have entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. President Woodrow Wilson, the president that signed into existence the Federal Reserve. There are more powerful people out there than even Warren Buffett. They are the men that own the world's central banks, and in turn, the world's governments, militaries, corporations, natural resources, and ultimately humanity. Give me the control of the credit of a nation, and I care not who makes the laws. Nathaniel Rothschild. Warren Buffett is now no more than a puppet of those that own and control the paradigm, namely the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. In 2002, Warren Buffett and Arnold Schwarzenegger traveled to England to meet Jacob Rothschild, 1 year before Arnold became the governor of California. As a paradigm puppet, Warren is allowed to keep his wealth so long as he serves to keep the paradigm intact. Time and time again, he has come to the paradigm's rescue. He spoke words of confidence in 2008. He even bought part of Goldman Sachs. He perpetually toes the line on CNBC with Becky Quick about the value of Americans investing in stocks. He supports Barack Obama and the false left-right paradigm. He is a proponent of Obamacare. He says the wealthy are not paying enough, and yet does not offer to pay more, or better yet, expose the system that is rigged to keep us down and profit those that are in control. He is for collectivist ideas like a heavy progressive income tax, the abolition of all rights of inheritance, and the centralization of credit of the state. These are just 3 of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. If you're wondering why supposed capitalists are for these things, it's because it is a concentration of power to the wealthy at the very top. He speaks against derivatives, and then invests in them. He complains about our trade deficit, and then invests heavily in China. And now he has become a boisterous opponent of gold.
If you offered me the choice of looking at some 67-foot cube of gold and looking at it all day, and maybe touching it and fondling it occasionally, and then saying, do something for me, and it says, I don't do anything, I just stand here and look pretty. And the alternative to that was to have all the farmland in the country. Everything, cotton, corn, soybeans, 7 Exxon Mobils, just think of that. Add $1 trillion of walking around money. Maybe call me crazy. But
not only am I going to call Warren crazy, I'm going to call him irrelevant and a hack. All of those things Warren owns, or says he would rather own than gold, only have value so long as the paper paradigm that he whores for functions. What good is all that farmland, 7 Exxon Mobils, and $1 trillion of Federal Reserve notes if we live in a world where Warren's bosses can create $16 trillion out of thin air, or simply regulate, tax, and even nationalize the companies and land? What good are any of those income-producing assets when we have the mathematically inevitable collapse of the world's first debt-based global reserve currency? What good are those income-producing assets when there is no economy because there is no currency? What good are those income-producing assets in a world full of war, riots, and death? Farmland and oil companies are income-producing asset, and gold is money, wealth protection, and insurance. They serve two completely different purposes in the investment world and act counter to each other when times are greedy or fearful. Warren Buffett could easily educate people on the two different purposes of these financial assets. Every 20 years or so, we go through shifts in perceived wealth. In the 40s and 50s, optimism propelled paper assets like blue chip stocks. In the 60s and 70s, fear caused tangible assets like oil, cattle, gold, and silver to outperform. In the 80s and 90s, paper assets like stocks were once again the place to be. Since 2000, tangible assets have been soaring while paper assets flounder. Unfortunately for Warren Buffett and the rest of the population addicted to paper assets, we still have another decade to go. And at the end, this will coincide with the mathematically inevitable collapse of the dollar, the demise of the U.S. as a global superpower, the fading age of the baby boomers, and most likely another world war. How will those paper assets handle that when there's no more high-frequency trading, banker bailouts, media propaganda, and the overall revulsion of those in power that either did nothing to prevent the collapse or at worst gutted the country so they could tack on another billion to the bottom line? Warren Buffett is irrelevant. What made Warren Buffett a great investor in the past was his ability to see value in stocks and ride the secular bull market that pushed his wealth to untold heights. But now he has so much invested in that paradigm he can't get out of it, so he's forced to defend it. Warren Buffett is irrelevant because that pretty brick of gold that does nothing has smoked this financial genius over the past decade, and yet he still has the gall to attack it. Since 2001, the average CNBC viewer is at best break-even if they invested in the Dow in nominal terms. This does not include for inflation and taxation. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway has returned a little more than 50% over a decade, and again, that does not include inflation or taxation. Meanwhile, that brick of gold that does nothing has returned 1,300% just sitting there. Perhaps people should be paying $1 million to have lunch with a hunk of gold instead of this has-been. Understanding where the market is going and getting there ahead of everyone else is the key of creating generational wealth. For example, if you got out of stocks in 2000 and bought a house, and then sold that house at the top of the housing bubble in 2005, and then plowed those profits directly into silver, you would have been up 3,500% over the past 12 years. And all of it tax-free and inflation protected. That's it. 2 simple trades done over 12 years has been all the difference. While this is an accomplishment I'm proud of, it is nothing compared to the real returns that we're going to see when this paradigm ends. With the mathematically inevitable collapse of the dollar, all paper assets will be rendered worthless as people learn the true meaning of counterparty risk. Only things that have real tangible value will have the means of protecting wealth, and nothing shines brighter than silver. In fact, it took 17,000 ounces of silver to buy 1 share of Berkshire Hathaway in 2001. Now it is 3,200 ounces. That is a dramatic loss in real purchasing power if you held your wealth in Berkshire Hathaway. And silver has not even started to get moving yet. And despite gold outperforming Warren Buffett over this past decade, he still comes out and says, it gets dug out of Africa or someplace, we melt it down, we dig a hole, we bury it again, and we pay people to stand around guarding it. It has no utility. Anyone watching it from Mars would be scratching their head. Warren Buffett is a hack. He could be telling the truth about how the world works and use his fame to help millions to avoid the single largest event in human history. He could explain to the masses what role gold plays in economics and liberty. But no, he sings songs lulling people back into complacency while the masses are led into generational slaughterhouse. He should be warning the world of what is coming and the dramatic impact of the mathematically inevitable collapse of the dollar will have on humanity. He could help millions into financial lifeboats like tangible assets with this fame. But no, he continues to pay lip service to a paradigm that only benefits those at the top, while the rest of the world continues to struggle with inflation, crony capitalism, banker bailouts, never-ending war, massive malinvestment, and outright fraud. When we see the final collapse of this paradigm, history will come down very hard on those that should have known better or participated in the collapse. Now you may think that I'm being hard on the old man, but I know he knows better. How do I know this? Look at the writings of his father, Congressman Howard Buffett. I will not take time to review the history of paper money experiments. So far as I can discover, paper money systems have always wound up with collapse and economic chaos. One of the first moves by Lenin, Mussolini, and Hitler was to outlaw individual ownership of gold. you begin to sense that there may be some connection between money, redeemable in gold, and a rare prize known as human liberty. I warn you that politicians of both parties will oppose the restoration of gold, although they may outwardly seemingly favor it, unless you are willing to surrender your children, your country to galloping inflation, war, and slavery. Then this cause demands your support. For if human liberty is to survive in America, we must win the battle to restore honest money. There is no more important challenge facing us than that issue, the restoration of your freedom to secure gold in exchange for the fruits of your labor. In the end, Warren Buffett is a high-paid hack. He is simply bought and paid for, like all the other major players in economics, politics, media, academia, military, and medicine. They are all either actively or passively supporting a paradigm and selling the illusion that gives them incredible power. Rare is the man who is given the keys to the kingdom and walks away. Apparently, even the brightest minds entrenched in the liberty movement can be corrupted. In absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value, for if there were, the government would have to make its holding illegal, as it has done in the case of gold. If everyone decided, for example, to convert their entire bank deposits to silver or copper or any other good, and thereafter declined to accept checks as payment for goods, bank deposits would lose their purchasing power, and the government-created bank credit would be worthless as a claim on those goods. The financial policy of the welfare state requires that there be no way for owners of wealth to protect themselves. This is the shabby secret of the welfare statist tirades against gold. Deficit spending is simply a scheme of confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the statist antagonism towards gold. That was written by none other than the most powerful central banker of our time, Alan Greenspan. You see, Alan Greenspan mentored under the libertarian guru Ayn Rand, who wrote classic novels like Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. And yet, as time went on, he sold his convictions short so that he could gain more and more power and further enslave humanity with debt. Men like Alan Greenspan and Warren Buffett could do so much to bring economic sanity and human freedom to the world. They are old and really have nothing left to lose. Their words would cut like a knife through the paradigm that spreads debt and death throughout the world. But they continue to perpetuate the lie and smile at us while they do it. I am left to ask the question, who is worse, the criminals or the men that enable the criminals? History will decide.